Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Matt Strickler, the Governor Northern Secretary of Natural Resources and the Chief Resilience Officer for the Commonwealth. Appreciate you all being here for the first Virginia Coastal Resilience Technical Advisory Committee meeting, and I'd like to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Before we get into introductions, which I absolutely want to do because we have really an all-star cast of folks here, and thank you for being willing to join this technical advisory committee and provide the advice that the governor and Admiral Phillips and I need to do this the right way. We have a fairly lengthy kind of legally necessary preamble that I need to read. So if you all can bear with me for that, we will get that done, and then I will turn it over to Admiral Phillips for calling the roll and doing the introduction. So just to jump right into this, generally public bodies in the Commonwealth are prohibited from meeting electronically under the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act, otherwise known as FOIA. However, the emergency language that was approved by the governor and the General Assembly in April allows us to move forward with certain restrictions that I'll outline here quickly. Before I review those provisions, let me just take a minute to review how the meeting is going to work. Well, first, we want to allow for participation by the committee members, the staff, and members of the public, certainly who wish to comment. However, it's essential that we're able to manage the meeting and the conversation effectively. Obviously. And so while the meeting will be open for committee comment due to the challenges associated with an electronic meeting, we want to allow the members of the public to be heard, and we have to do that in a coordinated way. So if you would like to make a comment as a member of the public, please do so in the chat box. Katie Salee on my staff will be monitoring the chat box and let us know when someone has submitted a comment, and we will certainly address those comments in the public comment period as time allows. And so we just ask everybody to be patient as we work through this and understand and appreciate all the challenges there. So just to get into the legal statement, Chapter 1283 of the 2020 Acts of Assembly, known as the Caboose Bill, includes language addressing the ability of public bodies to conduct electronic meetings without the need for a quorum being present in a single physical location, that is otherwise known as an electronic meeting. The language is submitted as an amendment by the governor and approved by the General Assembly at the April 22, 2020 reconvened session. The governor subsequently signed the Caboose Bill, and the bill is effective on April 24th. The Caboose Bill allows public bodies to hold electronic meetings when the governor has declared a state of emergency pursuant to Section 44-146.17 of the Code of Virginia if the nature of the declared emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe for the public body or governing board to assemble in a single location, if the purpose of the meeting is to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the public body, and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. The Caboose Bill also includes language regarding recordings and transcripts of electronic meetings. Please be advised if this meeting is being recorded, the recording will be available to the public through the Secretary of Natural Resources website. The comments in the chat room will also be preserved as a public record, and official minutes of the meeting will be drafted and posted in accordance with regular procedures. The minutes will also include the type of electronic communication means by which the meeting is being held, which is WebEx, as you know. The Caboose Bill does not allow the committee to hold an electronic meeting to discuss or transact business for any purpose at all. Rather, we may do so as long as the agenda items that the public body plans to take up are statutorily required or necessary to continue operations and discharge the lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities of the group. And obviously we fall into category B there. It's the committee's responsibility to determine whether the nature of the declared emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for the public body or governing board to assemble in a single location. So at the conclusion of my remarks, I'll ask for a motion for the committee to make this determination. If that motion fails, then this electronic meeting will end at that point. So hopefully that motion will not fail. The caboose bill requires compliance with the provisions of section 2.2-3708.2 of the code. Therefore, in accordance with that section, public bodies must include a telephone number that may be used to notify the public body of any interruption in telephone or video broadcast of the meeting. In the event that a disruption occurs, participants should contact Katie Salee by phone or text message at 804-663-7489. Again, that number is 804-663-7489. Additionally, if there's an interruption in the broadcast, the meeting must be suspended until public access is restored. Those provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act that are not addressed by the caboose bill remain in effect. So before we continue with the business portion of the meeting, we will I think the best thing to do quickly before I call for that motion is to go ahead and do a roll call, because we have to find out if we have a quorum, and we're also going to use this roll call to allow members of the committee to introduce themselves. I think given the virtual format, having that kind of lead in to let you know when it's time to introduce yourself rather than having a free-for-all is a beneficial thing. So we will go ahead and turn it over to Admiral Phillips to do the roll, call the roll, and then I will introduce my staff, and then we will present the motion that I talked about. So Admiral Phillips, over to you.
Thank you, Secretary Strickler. Good afternoon. Thank you for attending today. So as you can tell, if you're looking at the participants list, we have a very large number of people to navigate here, and Katie and I are frantically trying to get everybody into the right boxes. So if I miss you, please speak up, but I'll be going through the list by appointed TAC members first, and or their assigned designees, if in fact those people are present, and if I call on you and I don't call on your assigned designee, please go ahead and introduce them, and then I'll be working through the invited TAC members and their designated representatives as well. And so I see a few people have joined in various categories that are not seconds or not primaries, and I'll just try to keep everybody straight. So please jump in if I miss someone. Starting with the appointed TAC members, Secretary Matthew Day Strickler. Present. I'm Ann Phillips, Special Assistant to the Governor for Coastal Adaptation and Protection. Representing the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, Special Advisor Yewande Austin.
Present.
And Admiral Phillips, let me just remind people at this point, as folks are saying whether or not they're here for the quorum call, please also take a moment just to introduce yourself. Tell us what capacity you're serving in, and anything else you'd like to let the group know, just by way of introduction. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Yewande Austin. Honored to participate in this meeting. I have just recently been appointed by Governor Northam as Special Advisor to the Chief Diversity Officer for the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and very happy to support you in whatever way we can in this effort. My core responsibility will not only to be able to serve in consulting services to several state agencies, but for implementing the rollout of the One Virginia Strategic Diversity Plan across several state agencies in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today, Yewande. I know you didn't get much notice, so we appreciate it. Carlos Rivero, Chief Data Officer. Carlos, I know you're there. I saw you sign in. Okay, Director Clyde Chrisman, Department of Conservation and Recreation. Missing Clyde for the moment. Moving to the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, Deputy Coordinator Erin Sutton.
Present. I am new to the Virginia Department of Emergency Management, but not new to coastal resiliency, as I served as the emergency manager for the city of Virginia Beach for 8 years, and also served on the Resilient Virginia Board for 2.5 years. So thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Aaron. Representing Eric Johnston, Director, Department of Housing and Community Development, Program Administrative Director Tracy Munyon.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Tracy Munyon. I am the Resiliency Program Manager at the Virginia Department of Housing. And Eric Johnston sends his regrets. He is at our agency's board meeting today.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Tracy. Next, Stephanie Hamlet, Executive Director, Virginia Resources Authority.
I'm present. The Virginia Resources Authority is essentially a bond bank and tasked with administering the funds in the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, the grants, and the loans.
Thank you, Stephanie. Director, Department of Environmental Quality, David Paler.
Hello, I'm here. I apologize, my camera doesn't work. But the EQ is the regulatory agency that that has regulatory oversight of some of the issues that we're concerned with here.
Thank you, Director Paler. Director of Research Innovation for the Virginia Transportation Research Council and Director of the Virginia Transportation Research Council, Catherine McGee.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathy McGee. I am the Director of Research and Innovation. So I lead the research program for the Virginia Department of Transportation, and I also lead the innovation program for Secretary Valentine. And in that role, I oversee a number of efforts relating to resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Steve Bowman, Commissioner, Virginia Marine Resources Commission.
Good afternoon, folks. I'm Steve Bowman. I'm Commissioner of Marine Resources for the Commonwealth of Virginia. We are the stewards of Virginia's marine and aquatic resources and protectors of Virginia's tidal homelands for present and future generations. What we do is we're involved in the vetting and oversight of waterfront development and a number of other different responsibilities that deals with coastal resiliency. I'm also joined on the phone today with my Chief of Habitat Management, longtime employee, Tony Watkinson. Pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bowman, and thank you, Tony, for joining us. Ms. Emily Steinhilber of the Commonwealth Center for Recurrent Flooding Resilience at Old Dominion University.
Good afternoon. Emily Steinhilber with the CCRFR at Old Dominion University, and I work at ODU on building resilience throughout the university with our communities through applied research.
Thank you, Emily. Dr. Mark Luckenbach, Associate Dean for Research and Advisory Services, Virginia Institute of Marine Science at William & Mary.
I'm here, and good afternoon, everyone. As Admiral Phillips said, I serve as the Associate Dean for Research and Advisory Services at VIMS. I also serve as co-director for the CCRFR together with Emily Steinhilber and Elizabeth Andrews, who you'll hear from later.
Thank you, Mark. Elizabeth Andrews, Director, Virginia Coastal Policy Center at William & Mary Law School.
Good morning. This is Elizabeth Andrews. I direct, as you said, Anne, the Virginia Coastal Policy Center at William & Mary Law School, and I'm also a partner in the CCRFR with Dr. Luckenbach and Emily Steinhilber. Glad to be here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Director, Center for Coastal Studies, Virginia Tech.
I'm Roy Weiss. I'm a professor of natural hazards at Virginia Tech. I'm the director of the federally funded education program in disaster resilience and risk management, and as Anne said, the director of Center for Coastal Studies at Virginia Tech.
Thank you, Rob. Dr. Karen McGlath, Director, Environmental Resilience Institute at the University of Virginia.
Thank you, Anne. I'm Karen McGlathery. I am Director of UVA's Environmental Resilience Institute. And I'm also director of the Virginia Coast Reserve Long-Term Ecological Research Program, which is focused on nature-based solutions to climate change.
Thank you, Karen. Colonel Patrick Kinsman, Commander, United States Army Corps of Engineers, Norfolk District.
Hey team, again, Colonel Pat Kinsman, honored to be serving as the 59th Commander of the Norfolk District. I'm 2.5 years into a 3-year tour. We do military construction across the majority of the Commonwealth. We have a regulatory program that goes exactly by state boundaries, and we do civil works projects with willing stakeholders across the Commonwealth, and are doing some feasibility studies actually outside the Commonwealth as well, but honored to be on this team. Over.
Thank you, Colonel. Dr. Troy Hartley, Director, Virginia Sea Grant.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Ann. I'm Troy Hartley, Director of Virginia Sea Grant, which is a federal-state partnership program with our federal funding through NOAA. We fund a lot of research activities as well as outreach staff.
Thank you, Troy. Mr. Bob Crum, Executive Director, Hampton Roads Planning District Commission.
Good afternoon, Admiral Phillips. Bob Crum, as mentioned, Executive Director of the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. We work on behalf of the 17 local governments in the Hampton Roads region. Very pleased. Thank you for including us. I have with me today Ms. Whitney Catchmark, who's our Principal Water Resources Engineer at the PDC. So we look forward to working with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for joining us today. Ms. Martha Heater, Executive Director of Plan RVA.
Good afternoon. I'm Martha Heater with Plan RVA. We serve the Richmond Metro region. We're the Planning District Commission, and I believe Sarah Stewart from our staff, our Environmental and Natural Resources Program Manager, is also on the call.
Thank you very much, Martha. Thank you. Bob Lazaro, Executive Director, Northern Virginia Regional Commission.
Admiral Phillips, this is Norm Goulet.
Good afternoon, Norm.
Ralph,
are you representing?
Mr. Lazaro is going to be possibly a little late. He is currently having a video conference with the Inova Health Systems and the mayors and chairs of Northern Virginia.
Excellent. Norm, thank you for joining us. We hope Bob can join us later. And I believe Corey Miles is on with you also.
Yes, ma'am. Corey is here. Corey is a staff member of the Environmental and Resiliency Planning Division.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both for joining us this afternoon. Representing George Washington Regional Commission Deputy Director Kate Gibson.
Actually, Admiral, this is Linda Millsaps, and I'm the Executive Director of the George Washington Regional Commission. Hello, ma'am.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm on, and I think Kate is on, and we also have Denise Nelson, who works with the Berkeley group, but also helps us a lot with environmental efforts. So, and as you know, we serve Fredericksburg, Stafford, Spotsylvania, King George, and Caroline counties. Thank you very much for having us.
Sure. Dr. Millsaps, thanks so much for joining us. I didn't see you on there. I apologize. Just so I don't make that same mistake again, is Executive Director of the Northern Neck Planning District Commission, Mr. Jerry Davis, on the call. And I believe John Bateman is his designated representative. And John, I know you are on the call.
This is John Bateman, Regional Planner with the Northern Neck Planning District Commission. I am present, and I believe Jerry Davis is, but he is on phone.
Excellent, John. Thank you so much. Thank you to you both for joining us today. Executive Director of the Accomack Northampton Planning District Commission, Ms. Elaine Mile.
I am here, and I'm the Executive Director of the Accomack Northampton Planning District Commission. We have 19 towns and 2 counties. And of those, 3 of those are island communities, Chincoteague, Saxis, and Tangier. So it's very important to us.
Thank you, Elaine. Thanks for joining us today. I believe Shannon Alexander is on with you.
I believe she is. She is our Director of Planning.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Shannon, for joining us. Executive Director, Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission, Mr. Louis Lawrence.
Yes, I am here, and Kurt Smith is also my designated representative. He is on, but he's not listed on the sheet.
Okay, I see Kurt, and we will move him into the participants category. Kurt, thank you for joining us as well. Louis, thank you for joining us.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Alec Brebner, Executive Director, Crater Planning District Commission.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Alec Brebner representing Crater. We have 11 cities and counties in the southern portion of Virginia. My secondary will be my planning director, Jay Rufa. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much for joining us, Alec. Is Jay on the call today? I didn't see him, but that's not, just checking, so I don't miss anybody.
I haven't seen his name pop up yet.
Okay. All right, thank you so much. So that includes appointed TAC members and their designated seconds and additional attendees who are on the call today, I believe. And so we will move to invited TAC members, starting with Dr. Robert Young, geology professor, program director for the study of developed shorelines at Western Carolina University.
Hi, Ann. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm a geologist and grew up in Newport News, York County, Virginia, and very pleased to be a part of this process.
Thank you for joining us, Rob. Ms. Mary Carson Stiff, Wetlands Watch Policy Director.
Hi, my name is Mary Carson Stiff, and I work for Wetlands Watch. We're a nonprofit based in Norfolk, Virginia, working statewide on adaptation to sea level rise and encouraging nature-based solutions to flooding and sea level rise. The executive director, Skip Stiles, is also here, and he is my appointed representative as well.
Thank you, Mary Carson, and thank you, Skip, for joining us. Ms. Ashley Montgomery, Associate Designer, Hanbury.
Hello, my name is Ashley. I am an architectural designer and planner with Hanbury. We're an architecture firm in Norfolk, Virginia. And I don't see his name, but my appointed person is Scott Miller. He's a principal at Hanbury. He is also an architect and a planner.
Excellent. Thank you, Thank you, Ashley. And I believe I saw Scott on by phone, so he might be here in that capacity. Thank you both for joining us this morning, or this afternoon now. Dr. Carl Hirschner, Professor Emeritus of Marine Science, Virginia Institute of Marine Science at the College of William and Mary.
This is Carl, I'm here, and I have yet to officially find someone who wants to be me.
Okay. It's awesome. Thank you very much for joining us today, Carl. Jill Bierry, Director of Virginia Coast Reserve, the Nature Conservancy.
Hi, Ann. I'm here. This is Jill Bierry. I'm with the Nature Conservancy. Coast Reserve. And in this role, I'm representing the Virginia chapter of the Nature Conservancy and our interest in coastal resilience and adaptation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jill. Thanks for joining us this morning. Ms. Kristen Owen, Floodplain and Dam Safety Manager for Henrico County.
Hello, everyone. As Ann said, I am the Floodplain and Dam Safety Manager for Henrico County. I was previously the NFIP Coordinator for the state, and I also currently serve as the President for the Virginia Floodplain Management Association. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Kristen. Ms. Jessica Granis, Coastal Resilience Director, Audubon, and formerly with the Georgetown Climate Center.
Yeah, hi, thanks all. My name is Jessica Granis, Coastal Resilience Director for the National Audubon Society, and had the pleasure of supporting Virginia Beach's work on sea level rise adaptation in my former role at the Georgetown Climate Center. Happy to join.
Thank you for joining us today, Jessica. Representing Old Dominion's Institute for Research, Coastal Adaptation and Resilience, Associate Dean Carol Considine.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here today. I am the Flooding and Built Environment Program Head for the Institute of Coastal Adaptation and Resilience, and ICAR works to advance resilience of coastal communities through education, research, and practice. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining us today, Carol. I believe I saw President and CEO of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership sign in, Stephen Murray.
Yes, this is Stephen Moray. I'm here. VDP is the
State Economic Development Authority for the Commonwealth of Virginia. We're delighted to participate. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today, sir. We appreciate it. Representing the Secretary of Veterans and Defense Affairs, Coast Guard Captain Retired Thomas Krabs is on this morning.
Good morning, Admiral Present. And my job as a military liaison is to work with the communities and the military installations that share the same space and interest. And I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for joining us, Tom. And also joining us this morning, a partner from Andre Marquez Architects, Ms. Georgie Marquez.
Yes, good afternoon. Georgie Marquez, principal owner at Andre Marquez Architects. I'm an architect in Norfolk, and I was honored to serve with Admiral Phillips on the Norfolk Mayor's Climate Commission last year. Honored to be here.
Thank you for joining us, Georgie. We appreciate it. Secretary Strickler, to my knowledge, we have covered all of the appointed TAC members, their designated representatives, and the invited TAC members and their representatives that are present on the call.
Great. Thank you, Admiral Phillips. I assume that means that we have a quorum, but I need to ask you that question. Do we have a quorum?
That means that we have a quorum. Yes, sir. We do.
All right. Great. I will just quickly mention that in addition to Admiral Phillips, we have a number of folks from our team and the Natural Resources Secretariat that are helping out today. I mentioned Katie Salee, who is our kind of office operations manager, is running the webinar and taking care of all the logistics today. We also have Sharui Zhang, who is on Admiral Phillips's team, a fellow who is helping us out with a lot of the work and has put together the presentations and will be advancing those. And Deputy Secretary of Natural Resources Joshua Sachs is on the call as well and has been doing a lot of our work with our floodplain management team at DCR. And I'd also like to mention that Laura McKay from the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program and her team are helping out with staffing the Technical Advisory Committee as well. So Laura will be on and or have some members from her team involved with this as well. So quickly before we get into to the business today, which hopefully we'll get to, I need to read a motion that I would hopefully have a member of the TAC make. The recommended motion is that the Technical Advisory Committee certifies that the nature of the declared COVID-19 emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe for the board to assemble in a single location, and further that the agenda items to be taken up at this meeting are necessary to continue operation and discharge lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities of the committee. Is there someone who would be willing to make that motion?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Bowman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Thanks. And unfortunately, we now have to call the roll. So we're going to go back through that again quickly. Admiral Phillips. Admiral Phillips, you may be muted.
I am in fact muted. My apologies. And I'll start my video again. And I see Director Clyde Chrisman has joined us from Conservation and Recreations. Good afternoon, Clyde. Thank you for joining us. We are calling the roll recommended motion that we may convene under the designated legal circumstances surrounding the COVID-19 crisis. Secretary Strickler.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Especially Wanda Austin.
Yes.
Carlos Rivero.
Yes, present.
Okay. Thank you, Carlos. Director Chrisman.
Yes.
Deputy Coordinator Sutton.
Yes.
Program Administrator for DHCD, Ms. Tracy Munyon.
Yes.
Thank you, Tracy. Ms. Stephanie Hamlet.
Yes.
Mr. David Paler.
Yes.
Ms. Kathy McGee.
Yes.
Commissioner Stephen Bowman.
Yes.
Ms. Emily Steinhilber.
Yes.
Dr. Mark Lukenbach.
Yes.
Director Elizabeth Andrews.
Yes.
Dr. Robert Weiss.
Present.
Dr. Kara McGlathery.
Yes.
Colonel Patrick Kinsman.
Yes.
Dr. Troy Hartley.
Yes.
Director Robert Crum.
Yes.
Director Martha Heater.
Yes.
Mr. Norm Goulet, representing Northern Virginia Regional Commission.
Yes.
Dr. Linda Millsaps.
Yes.
Mr. Jerry Davis.
This is John Bateman. Yes.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Director Elaine Mile.
Aye.
Director Louis Lawrence.
Yes.
And Director Alec Brebner.
Aye.
And to the invited TAC members, Dr. Robert Young.
Aye.
Miss Mary Carson Stiff.
Aye.
Miss Ashley Montgomery.
Yes.
Dr. Carl Hirschner.
Aye.
Director Joe Bieri.
Yes.
Miss Kristen Owen.
Aye.
Miss Jessica Granis.
Yes.
Dean Carol Considine.
Yes.
President Stephen Moray.
Yes.
Mr. Thomas Krabs.
Present.
And Miss Georgie Marquez.
Aye.
Mr. Secretary, we have a unanimous response approving your motion.
Hey, and Bob Lazaro here. Norm voted yes, fine by me. I'm sorry for being late.
Thank you for joining us, Bob. We appreciate your time and thank you for letting me know you're here and for voting.
Yeah.
Mr. Secretary, over to you. We will now proceed.
Apologies, I was muted, so yet another dollar in the jar there. I understand that that Carlos Rivero is with us now. Carlos, do you want to say hello to the group?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. This is Carlos Rivero. I'm the Chief Data Officer for the Commonwealth of Virginia, and working on data governance, sharing, and analytics in support of the Technical Advisory Committee.
Great, thank you, Carlos. Thank you for your help on this. I have a little bit more preambulatory stuff to get through before we get to the business meeting, so please bear with me. Just quickly, I'm going to explain a little bit about how we're going to handle participation by committee members and others. Everybody except for the individual presenting materials for an agenda item will be muted. Once the presentation is completed, the committee members and only the committee members will be unmuted for discussion and may indicate their desire to comment by raising their hand, hopefully, or commenting in the chat box. My staff, including Katie and then of course Admiral Phillips, will help assist with ensuring the committee members are recognized when they have questions or comments, and as needed, staff will be unmuted as well to address any questions or concerns. And I mentioned earlier, the members of the public will be able to ask questions, provide input through the chat box function only, and then we will get to those questions and comments during the public comment portion of the meeting. So we're now ready to get into the business of the committee, and the first item up is a presentation by me, which I promise I will keep short just to review the Virginia Coastal Master Planning Framework. So Sheree, if you could get those slides up, that would be great. I would just say, before we really get started here, just again, thank you all so much for agreeing to participate in this committee. We're really fortunate in the Commonwealth of Virginia to have so many smart people who are, not only seeing this every day and trying to help their communities work through it, or study it, or work for state agencies on it, as the case may be. But it's really a testament to to all the work that you all are doing and how important this problem is to solve. That you all are here, and everybody is working to pull in the same direction. And we've got some difficult challenges in front of us, and certainly a lot of work to do over the next year to get from where we are to where we want to be with a full master plan in place. But just wanted to say thanks again, and now I'll run through these slides real quickly. After that, Admiral Phillips will give an update on the RFP for helping us put together, and by us I mean the TAC and the governor's office, put together a coastal master plan, and then we'll have some updates from state agencies that are working on coastal resilience, and before we get into kind of next steps for the upcoming meetings. So generally, the Coastal Resilience Master Planning Framework, it's a document that you all, I'm assuming, have all at least know is out there. Hopefully have at least read the executive summary. Maybe if you're a glutton for punishment, have worked through all of the chapters and the supporting materials. But it's a document that the governor's very proud of, that we put a lot of hard work into out of my office, particularly Admiral Phillips and her team, and a lot of the folks on this call, with helping us get good content and vet some of the ideas and concepts that are included in it. And it really is our roadmap, our principles, as it says here, for getting to a coastal resilience master plan. The governor rolled this out in late October. Since then, we've been working diligently to kind of take the next steps, the immediate steps that are required under the framework, and I'll talk about some of those here in the presentation. Sheree, next slide, please. So the way that the framework is structured, first, is based on 5 guiding principles, and these are things that the governor felt strongly about, that he wanted to use to just set the tone for how we're going to approach coastal resilience at the state level, and with the state playing a role in helping communities become more resilient. And the first one here may seem obvious to a lot of folks, but I know many of you all work in diverse communities across the Commonwealth, and there's a diversity of opinions out there on a lot of issues, including climate change and its causes, and sea level rise and its causes. But it was important to the governor to make sure that in this framework we acknowledged climate change, acknowledging that it has consequences, and basing our decision making on the best available science to hopefully help us lessen or avoid those consequences. The second guiding principle is using this framework as a way to enhance equity. Identifying socioeconomic inequities and in the coastal areas of Virginia, coastal communities. We know that a lot of folks who come from traditionally underserved communities have, over time, their communities have been located in areas that are marginal for a number of reasons, but one of those is because flooding is a concern. And now with us seeing more flooding and increased severity and intensity of storm and rainfall events, those communities are even in a more compromised position. And this is certainly something that is a racial equity issue, but it is also an economic equity issue, and it's not just urban, it's rural as well. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir here from the folks who represent some of the urban and rural PDCs on the call, but it's certainly something that we've got underserved communities kind of sprinkled throughout the Tidewater region. So that's something that the governor felt very strongly about wanting to address through this framework. The third principle here is using nature-based solutions, recognizing the importance of our green infrastructure, our natural coastal barriers, that not only serve to reduce storm surge, reduce the impacts of erosional forces, and reduce flooding, but also are important coastal habitats, and that's are key for replenishing our fisheries, for the tourism industry, for outdoor recreation, and a lot of times are the things that have traditionally helped us protect the coast, and through restoring those, we hope that we can get additional coastal protection, and also, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, good bang for our buck for our restoration dollars. So the fourth point here is using a region-specific approach. Obviously, we'll get to more of this in the coming slides, and you've seen it in the master planning framework, but different regions of Virginia are different with respect to their risks, with respect to their demographics, with respect to the capacity that they have to address some of these problems, and looking at those differences and at the similarities across different communities and different regions, and being able to tailor resilient solutions to those communities and regions is something that we think is very important, and something that the expertise of others on this call will certainly help us with a lot. And then finally, the fifth guiding principle here is making sure that we are seeking out cost-effective solutions, understanding the fiscal realities that we face. You all know this, but we're never going to be able to build our way out of this problem. There's not enough money to pour all the concrete that we would need to armor all of our shorelines and protect everything that's behind them, and we wouldn't want to do that for the reasons that I mentioned before, particularly the values that Virginians place on the natural coastal environment. So making sure that we are working together to find the ways, again, to get us the most bang for our buck, and trying to build in coastal resilience. Next slide. So underneath those kind of guiding principles, there are four primary goals that we have for the master planning framework to get from a framework to an actual master plan. The first of those is identifying and prioritizing projects. We have some communities and some of this work done at the state level that we've already gotten to the point where certain specific projects are identified and to some degree prioritized. That's great. We have a lot of other communities and a lot of other state agencies that have problems and assets that they want to protect or solve, as the case may be, that we have not identified and prioritized yet. And so that's going to be something that we want to work through together, as the technical advisory committee, with the consultant that we're hopefully going to be able to bring on in the near future to identify and prioritize the projects that will go ultimately into the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. The second goal is establishing a financing strategy. We have some tools already for that. There are local governments and planning districts that are using, developing and using their own tools and methods, and we think that's great, and we think all of that existing stuff would go into a more holistic financing strategy. But there's certainly a need to talk about collaborating and making sure that we're getting all of our existing funding streams moving towards the same goal, and then also identifying other ways to finance some of the big ticket items that we know that we're going to need. The third primary goal is incorporating climate change projections into our work. We have done that through Executive Order 24, through the Flood Risk Management Standard, and Executive Order 45, and through the Coastal Master Planning Framework using the NOAA Intermediate High sea level rise projection, and we've got other climate projections for rainfall and the impacts potentially that more intense precipitation is going to have on our stormwater infrastructure for for example. So hoping that we can work with localities or planning districts. I know HRPDC has already built in that same curve to their projections, which is great, and trying to make sure that we're coordinating across coastal Virginia on climate change projections. And fourth, and finally is coordinating our efforts, coordinating state, federal, regional, and local coastal resilience efforts, not just kind of on the funding side, as I mentioned before, but also just to make sure that what one community is doing isn't negatively impacting another community, or that we're missing opportunities by not operating at the right scale and scope. Next slide, please. So I mentioned regions before. The master planning framework breaks down coastal Virginia into 4 planning regions. They are Hampton Roads, which is the Hampton Roads PDC, rural coastal Virginia, which is our localities on the eastern shore, the northern neck, and the middle peninsula. The Fall Line, what we're calling the Fall Line North region, which is Greater Washington Regional Commission in Northern Virginia, and the Fall Line South, which is our Crater and Planning District Commission and Plan RVA. And certainly, these lines blur and bleed into each other. The justification, I think, was that these 4 regions have more, the localities within these 4 regions have more similarities than differences based on particularly geography and the types of threats that they're facing, and to some degree the capacity that they have to address some of those threats. So certainly happy to talk more about that with folks, and obviously there'll be things that we need to deal with on a case-by-case basis if things just don't fit right into the categories we have in them. But as a planning tool, this was what we came up with. Next slide, please. So what's next now that we've got the framework out there? We've established a technical advisory committee. That's one of the items you see there for fall of 2020. Our outreach efforts are underway, and Miriam Karad on my staff, who I didn't introduce and I think is with us here today, is really spearheading our outreach efforts, community outreach, in addition to Admiral Phillips. So that's well underway as well. And then the RFP, which I mentioned, also is now out on the street, and we certainly can't say a ton about that today. Admiral Phillips will have her presentation, and I don't want to steal her thunder, but that's something that we've got in the mix already. So moving from the fall into General Assembly session, we'll have a lot of churn there in the winter, and then looking towards the spring, we want to make sure that we can get we will have our first regional greenhouse gas initiative auction, which, as all of you know, a significant amount of the proceeds from that will go into the Virginia Community Flood Preparedness Fund, and then we'll be making grants out of that fund for coastal resilience and flood preparedness statewide. And we'll be able to do that. Hopefully, the first grant round will be in the spring. We'll also be working together with state agencies and certainly with the input of this group and others on a strategic coastal relocation handbook, which certainly happy to talk more about this, but this is certainly just a guide. It's a resource for folks. It's not something the Commonwealth is going to be telling anyone that they have to do or have to adopt any of the best practices that would be in such a handbook, but we think it's really important to get those best management practices out there in a way that's accessible for communities that are considering doing things like buyouts and relocations to improve resilience of their communities. And then obviously the TAC will be meeting all throughout this time, and with the goal of getting to a drafted and developed master plan for release next fall. Next slide. So in moving towards that, obviously, I'm working very closely as a Chief Resilience Officer with Admiral Phillips and her role. We've got a lot of good work to do here with TAC and good conversations to have, and a lot of great input I think will be coming from you all. Having that going on in parallel with the outreach and getting your input on communities or individuals or stakeholder groups that we need to reach out to and need to make a concerted effort to to make sure our understanding of what we're trying to do. That's going to be a huge help for us working together as part of the TAC. And then having the Coastal Zone Management Program, as I mentioned before, kind of staffing us up and helping us work through some of this is going to be great. Getting to a kind of a 1.0 version of the master plan this fall, and then repeating this process, hopefully at least every 5 years to update the master plan based on new information. Next slide. So again, I won't say a whole lot about this piece, the RFP, other than what's on the slide here, because Anne's got a full presentation about it. But we are looking into contracting with a firm and have the authorization from the General Assembly to spend money on this in advance of getting dollars into the Community Flood Preparedness Fund to help do a full coastal analysis, identify gaps, places in built and natural infrastructure that we need to address. Economic impact analysis and helping us work together on our prioritization process, in addition to identifying some of the resources and projects that really need to move ahead. So obviously on the left, you can see there, that's a conversation that will be ongoing with the TAC, with my office and with Admiral Phillips. We'll be working to develop protocols for prioritization and then coming up with our first list of priority projects. Next slide. The immediate actions, and Governor Northam made it clear when he announced this in October that he wanted us to move quickly to get this stuff up and running. The Technical Advisory Committee, as absolutely as we're here meeting, is moving forward, and you see some of the charge there for the TAC. We'll get back to that in a minute. Elevating the Coastal Zone Management Program to report to my office and report to Admiral Phillips on issues related to coastal resilience and help support the tax work there. And then again, I mentioned community engagement. We've got a lot of outreach going on right now and certainly want to continue and enhance that in the coming weeks and months. Next slide. So this is something that I anticipate there'll be a fairly robust conversation on after I'm finished with the presentation today. But we developed this slide to really take what's in the master planning framework and break down kind of the charge, the directive to the TAC into 5 main categories. There are a number of mentions of the Technical Advisory Committee sprinkled throughout the framework document, but really it boils down to these 5 kind of core responsibilities that the TAC is going to have over the next year and then going into the future as we continue to need to reevaluate and update the master plan. The first of these items is developing protocols and identifying and prioritizing projects. There's certainly a number of ways that we can do this, but we need to act quickly to develop basically the framework we're going to use to look at, take a close look at, and then rank important projects, and then get to actually prioritizing those once they're identified. The second is developing a funding and financing strategy. We certainly have, as I mentioned, a number of existing sources of revenue, both federal grants, the new Community Flood Preparedness Fund, some loan programs, and others that we would want to include in that strategy. But there's certainly other opportunities as well with some of the things that we mentioned in the framework, and that we know from other places, that have worked. Green bonds, public-private partnerships being a couple of examples there. Third is tracking scientific developments and recommending new scientific research and new studies that need to be done to support the master planning process. Fourth is aligning our economic development initiatives with coastal resilience. That's something that's very important. We want to make sure that particularly transportation, business development sites, port infrastructure, those types of things are moving forward with an eye towards making sure that we're building in resiliency on the front end rather than on the back end, and continuing to develop an interest and capacity in a water-driven economy, particularly in coastal Virginia. And last, and this is very, very important, is strengthening our partnerships with our federal installations. We know that individual communities and individual state agencies have good relationships with our federal partners and their footprint in the Commonwealth, but making sure that we're able to, to continue to build those relationships and broaden them, particularly in the context of coastal resilience and the master planning effort will be very important. Next slide. So before we go into a discussion, I just want to throw out quickly that we will get together again soon for another meeting. I'm hoping that we can do that kind of the middle of February, about 2 months from now. I think bi-monthly meetings are probably what we're going to need to do in order to keep things on track, and then potentially have some subcommittee work going on. In the interim. So at the next TAC meeting, there are a couple things that I'd like to have, at least throw out as potential agenda items, and then get the committee's suggestions on other things, or if these are the right things to include at that meeting. The first thing, I think at that point we will have hopefully selected a contractor to, in response to the RFP, to help us put together the master plan. So hopefully we would get an update on that process and a presentation by the selected contractor, and an opportunity for members of the TAC to ask them questions. And then second, a discussion, maybe a more fulsome discussion on the Community Flood Preparedness Fund guidelines. There's obviously a draft out of those for public comment right now. The public comment period will go on for a little bit longer, but I think maybe at the next meeting we'll have a little bit more time for a deeper dive into that. So I think that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take questions, and if I can't answer them, then I will kick them over to somebody smarter than I am to do their best. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Strickler. And this is Ann Phillips. I'll just jump in for everyone. If you would like to ask a question, you can unmute yourself if you're one of the participants. And if you're struggling with that, put it in the chat, and we will be happy to address it.
Hey, Secretary Strickler, it's Colonel Pat Kinsman. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Hey, awesome. Hey, I just want to commend the Commonwealth and the effort here for getting this started, right? Again, and I think that's, and I've only got a little bit of window on the rest of my kind of fellow Corps of Engineer districts that are doing their best to address the challenge of, rising seas and perhaps land subsidence, in different areas of the country. I do think that magnitude for the nation to take on is pretty significant, but the Commonwealth is, all over it with this initial effort. As we look at the importance of, DoD installations in the Commonwealth, again, I look at my individual role as, again, obviously representing the Norfolk District Corps of Engineers with access, to some of the larger resources brought, by the Corps of Engineers, and in some private discussions with Tom Krabs, I guess the method by which the Commonwealth does outreach with other DoD installations or DoD entities, I think is a pretty important thing to consider right up front. So I'll just offer that for, I guess, comment over.
Great. Thank you, Colonel Kinsman. I certainly appreciate that, and have appreciated the opportunity to work with you the last 2.5 years and your team as well, and look forward to continuing to strengthen our partnership with the Army Corps. I mean, you don't need me to tell you, but the work that you all do in coastal Virginia is really critical to all of our resilience efforts. So thank you for that, and appreciate you being here today.
You bet.
Secretary Strickler, this is Tom Krabs to follow up on Colonel Kinsman's remark there, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I second his acknowledgement of DoD footprint and the importance of the their impact on our state and prevalence throughout it, would it be, I invite discussion as to whether or not we should invite a DoD representative to the panel, bringing their stakeholder view to the panel.
Thanks, Tom. Admiral Phillips, do you want to take a first crack at that?
Certainly. So, first, thanks to Colonel Kinsman and thanks to Captain Krabs as well. So, for both of you, and Tom, you and I have talked about this. What level are you encouraging? So, we've talked about a number of different things. There are some more major individual service commands within the Commonwealth that we can invite to participate who are impacted in the coastal region. So we talked about that, but then we've also discussed, and I think what you're talking about here is bringing in DoD representatives from a different level. So perhaps from Office of Economic Adjustment or elsewhere within the Department of Defense. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? What you're thinking and what you might recommend?
Yes, Admiral. I think that an invite, as I'm representing the Secretary of Veterans and Defense Affairs and also representing the installations as well. I think that's part of the reason on this panel. But offering an invitation at a level that would have good visibility of the installations throughout the state that are subject to coastal impacts. What comes immediately to mind is Commander Naval Region Mid-Atlantic, but I don't want to put that's the level of the invite I would suggest, and then I would expect that it probably be delegated to someone that would best represent those interests and make sure that the stakeholders' perspective from the installations is heard and is able to be shared at their viewpoint and from their viewpoint.
Got it. Thanks. Admiral, I didn't hear earlier. Is Admiral Rock with us today?
He is not. He's not with us today.
Gotcha. And so he was the individual in his position that we had invited to represent the Navy at the level that we thought was appropriate. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more? And we can certainly take the suggestion under advisement. But I did just want to be clear that that it's not something that we haven't thought about.
Yes. The challenge for any of the active duty services, but certainly for Navy Region Mid-Atlantic, is in what capacity do they participate? And in other words, do they participate as active voting members like they are in the Bay Commission, or are they in an advisory capacity? And if they are, who would that be? There are a number of options, of course. They have a staff, but some of the key players are departing, are retiring. So, and that does not apply to Admiral Rock. It's people who he might assign. So we're still working through that process with them.
Great. Thanks, Ann. Other questions?
I have a question here in the chat. It is, what is the strategy and timeline for appointing subcommittees to tackle the individual TAC charges?
Sure. So it's a great question. I think the timeline, and this is something I was hoping to have discussions with folks today about is soon. I don't necessarily know that we need to do the work of establishing them today, but in my mind, I think the kind of the 5 categories that I outlined as being charges to the TAC potentially could be the seed of what the subcommittees might look like, and then we would take input from folks who wanted to work on a subcommittee on a particular issue or suite of issues and do our best, I think, probably between this meeting and the next, shortly after this meeting, because we'd want to get some subcommittee work done before the next meeting, to place folks and get those set up. So if that's something that, that members want to do, if we think that establishing some subcommittees to work on some of these specific issues is generally a good thing and the right approach. Certainly would love to hear people's thoughts on that. And as I mentioned, we can take people's, requests and kind of work all those together and come up with some subcommittee rosters that make sense and will be helpful.
Mr. Secretary, this is Carl Hirschner.
Dr. Hirschner, how are you this afternoon?
I'm fine. So I would like to begin with a recommendation that you do proceed with the development of the subcommittees, particularly the ones that are going to be responsible for project prioritization and protocols for doing that. That seems to me to be an immediate need.
Okay, thanks, Carl.
Secretary Strickler, this is Mary Carson Stiff.
Good afternoon.
Hey, I have a question about the next TAC meeting, which is scheduled for sometime in February, and the interest in taking a deeper dive into the flood guidelines, the flood fund guidelines. I think that's a great idea for the TAC to focus on, but I wondered if the timeline might be not matching up perfectly with public comment period for those guidelines ending at the end of January. Would the TAC discussion and concepts and suggestions developed in our meeting be eligible for consideration for the guidelines?
The short answer is yes. Do you want more than a short answer?
Nope, that's good.
Okay.
Hello, this is Karen McGlathery at UVA. I was interested in hearing a little bit more about the strategy for addressing the climate equity or the social equity issues. I know that's one of the top priorities. Beyond the indices that are present, are there strategies? Do we have enough expertise on the TAC to really adequately address that? Thank you.
Sure, Karen, thank you for the question. So I think, one of the things that we have as a kind of a guiding light here is the legislation that created the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and the requirement that a significant portion of that funding go to underserved communities. And I think the development of that, the guidelines for that fund are going to really mirror what you're seeing in the coastal framework, and so I think we've got a good blueprint there for making sure that we are directing resources to some of the communities in need. As you mentioned, I think identifying the needs of communities is going to be one of the biggest challenges. In a lot of cases, these are places that haven't gotten the attention they need because nobody's asked them, right? And we need to go in and find the people who can put us in touch with the appropriate community groups, make sure that we're getting in front of them, talking to them about the framework, what it could potentially mean as far as resources for their communities, and listening to them about what they want the future of their communities to look like, and what we can do to help them get there. So the outreach component that I keep coming back to on this is really what's going to be critical. And I think we do have pretty good capacity on the TAC to address that through Dr. Underwood's office, through the planning district commissions and others, and certainly open to adding additional expertise if folks have people in mind. But it's going to be doing a lot of legwork of making sure that we're again, doing really thorough community outreach and making sure that we're getting buy-in, but also getting a lot of good feedback on what communities want to see, and the TAC's going to play a huge role in that, right? Giving us ideas for how we how and when we need to get in with certain communities and those types of things. So certainly want to keep that conversation open, and any ideas that folks have for specific communities or specific approaches that we want to take as far as outreach. We'd appreciate that. Obviously, COVID is putting a big wrench in the works there, but hopefully we've got vaccines on the horizon soon and can do some more personal touch outreach coming in the spring.
Mr. Strickler, this is Yewande Austin from the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I'd love to piggyback that statement about strategies with my own curiosities about what the approach will be to outreach. I'm sure that you understand that in underserved communities that unfortunately something as important as natural resources and coastal resilience is just not top of mind for a lot of communities who are fighting what they perceive as bigger fights, which are very serious. That's systemic racism within healthcare and education, and just getting equitable access to nutritional food resources, right? And so I just wanted to make a point to you that when you do think about outreach, that it's very important that you think about making sure that your messaging is culturally and socially inclusive and relevant to those communities. And so perhaps that's one role that the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion could help you in framing that.
Yeah, Ms. Austin, thank you so much for that. It's great to meet you virtually, and thank you so much for your help with this initiative. I hear you 100%, and our messaging around this is we certainly will want your help on honing that. But this is something that is a public health and public safety issue, particularly for communities that are seeing recurrent flooding and damage to homes and residences and people facing difficulty getting to work and those types of things. So absolutely want to coordinate with you on making sure that we get all that right, and understand that there are many significant challenges that underserved communities continue to face in addition to this.
Sure, happy to support you in that area.
Thank you.
We've got a couple more comments in the chat. The first one says, my understanding from Mr. Sachs' webinar last week was that joint land use studies and the project identification and prioritization established by consensus would not de facto meet the criteria for funding consideration in the community flood preparedness funding. Is that correct? And do you have any additional information to share in that regard?
Thanks for the question. I did not hear Josh's presentation last week. So Josh, if you're on, do you want to jump in and handle that question?
Yes, I'm on. Can people hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you, and we can see your ceiling.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you see me now?
Yes.
I can't see you, but okay. So I think the comment simply was to say that when we develop guidelines for the flood fund, we will want a community to have a minimum type of resilience plan. And when asked about specific plans, I said we hadn't made any determinations yet on what would or would not apply. That's the extent of the answer there.
So the question was specifically about joint land use studies. Is the question whether or not the fund would be available to provide match for those types of studies?
Mr. Dubois, would you like to jump in?
Okay, well, I guess I would just offer then that we want to be and we're obviously taking public comment on this so that we can get good ideas of things that the fund should and should not be used for. But certainly, if there is a study that is very significant that we want to get done, and we recognize and identify as important to get done for coastal resilience and flood protection. Those are the types of things that the fund was envisioned for, and the statute lays out that studies are something that the fund can support. So, obviously, whether or not money goes out the door is going to be based on a number of factors, and these will be applications for specific projects or studies versus hypotheticals. But we would, in general, I think, at least, in theory, that's the kind of thing that we would look favorably upon. And then, of course, we have to finalize the guidelines before I can give you a real answer on that. But that's my thinking as of.
We have another question from Ashley Montgomery. She's interested in hearing more about how community engagement is being organized when it comes to equity and diversity. I think we've discussed this a little bit already. And she also wants to know a little more about educating communities.
Sure. Thanks, Ashley, for the question. Miriam, are you on with us today?
I believe she is. Let me unmute her.
Thanks.
Miriam, you're on.
I'm sorry, Matt. Miriam is texting that her audio doesn't work for some reason. So.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Well, so Miriam is leading our outreach efforts, and she has worked with Admiral Phillips and is coordinating closely with Ms. Austin and Dr. Underwood's office on kind of what we need to do as far as our outreach strategy. There, it's coming together. We're kind of in the process of taking input from people on where we need to go, who we need to talk to. Putting that on a list and getting those meetings set up, while at the same time we're moving ahead with outreach to some of the known quantities, particularly local governments, planning district commissions, floodplain managers, et cetera, to get the ball rolling at least. So it's kind of our outreach strategy, our outreach spreadsheet is kind of a living document, and we want it to be that way. It's something that I think we're always going to continue to get good ideas from people on about who we need to go talk to, and so certainly welcome Ashley, your input on that, and other members of the TAC as well.
Thank you.
I believe Carl Hirschner has a question. I'm going to go ahead and unmute him. Whenever you're ready.
I asked the question about timelines for the subcommittees, which has been answered.
Oh, great. All right, next question is from Bob Crum.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. First, I just want to start on behalf of the Hampton Roads region of just complimenting this administration and Admiral Phillips and her hard work. As you know, this is the issue in our region, and we're really excited about the opportunities that this framework presents. I appreciate Admiral Phillips. She's already been in Hampton Roads at a couple of meetings per our request. We've had engaged conversations with our 17 local government administrators, our city managers, and county administrators. We've also had Admiral Phillips to discuss for a couple hours the planning framework with some of our local elected officials, which is a subcommittee of our PDC. Mr. Secretary, the CAOs and some of our elected officials asked if I would share two comments that they have. First off, as an intro, their support for what you're trying to do in the framework, we want to be part of making this as successful as possible. Their first comment really has been raised by a couple of others today, and that's the importance of public engagement, community engagement. Particularly the challenge of during a COVID pandemic, engaging disadvantaged populations and minority populations. And I know this is, I'm preaching to the choir, but obviously this creates a whole different set of challenges for how we engage our community. Perhaps we can talk about this under the RFP section, but our hope is that the RFP and the contract you'll be signing with the consultant to the master planning framework will have a portion dedicated to that community engagement process as we move throughout this process, particularly in light of the COVID challenges. And obviously a lot of firms with expertise in how to engage the population during challenging times like these. The second item that they raised was related to the Strategic Coastal Relocation Handbook. And we want to stress that we recognize that relocation is going to need to be part of the conversations that we have. But in our region and probably in many other regions, relocation is not settled policy yet. As you're very aware, some of our cities have begun to look at that, but there's a lot of conversation yet to happen. So the one comment we received, particularly from our city managers and some of our elected officials, was it may not be feasible to get to that handbook in a 10-month period. And perhaps there might be other parts of the plan that might be better short-term goals than the relocation handbook. So thank you, sir, for taking those comments. And again, we just look forward to partnering with you through this effort.
Great. Well, thank you, Director Crum. It's good to see you. And certainly, you know, as a region, Hampton Roads has been way out in front of the Commonwealth on this for a while. So all your leadership has been really helpful to us in putting this plan together. And I know the governor really appreciates everything that is going on down there. Your points are very good ones. And I think, you know, we absolutely want to, you know, see what capacity, you know, the consultants come in with as far as outreach, and that's something that we would absolutely want to have them help us with. And on the relocation handbook, I hear you. I know that this isn't something that you know, folks are really eager to dive into in every locality. And again, I just want to stress that, you know, we don't in any way want to try to push people in a direction that they're not comfortable with. But we do at the same time want to be able to get these resources together in case there are people who want to try to use them. So I understand where you're coming from as far as prioritization as well, and certainly we'll you know, we'll make sure that we're staying on top of you know, of all the other things we need to take care of too during this process.
Thank you.
Secretary Strickler, this is Miriam. My apologies for the technical difficulties. I just wanted to add, I think you all covered most of the outreach conversation, but just wanted to add that we're also using our advisory boards, including the environmental justice and our African American, Asian, and Latino advisory boards, as well as a liaison to communities, as well as the VDEM Health Equity Team. And I think it was just mentioned, you know, in regards to the current pandemic and conditions, and they're very much trained and have the experience over the last 6+ months in getting conversations or, you know, information out to the public, and kind of working through those channels to increase outreach. And as Secretary Strickler mentioned, any insight or comments on how to do that better are always welcome. That's all for me.
Great, thanks, Miriam. That's Assistant Secretary of Natural Resources, Miriam Karad, who's leading our outreach efforts. So she'll be a key part of the team going forward as well. Other questions or comments? Okay, well, if not, we can certainly come back and talk more about this stuff towards the end of the meeting, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I know that we've got some other presentations to get through. So Admiral Phillips, I believe you're up next to talk a little bit about the RFP process.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Secretary Strickler. I have a very short series of comments about the RFP. Just to update everyone, some of you I know are extremely familiar with this and have read it and been a part of its development, others perhaps less so. So as we work through our framework development, we knew all along that we would need assistance from a professional firm to help us do some of the things we needed to do. Over time, we were able to work out a process by which we could begin to move forward in that context. And so, as Secretary Strickler mentioned during his presentation, on December 1st of this year, 2020, the Department of General Services issued a request for proposal, RFP 866 TAC 2. You can find it on the EVA website. To procure technical engineering services to assist in developing the Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan, as you mentioned, the first version of which we expect to have completed by the fall of 2021. The RFP itself was researched and put together by the Office of the Secretary of Natural Resources with gracious assistance, I should note, from the City of Virginia Beach, the Commonwealth Center for Current Flooding Resilience, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and the Department of General Services. Specifically, the RFP requests contractor assistance with risk analysis, including conducting a full coastal analysis of current and future sea level rise and nuisance flooding impact on Virginia's 8 coastal planning districts and 4 coastal planning regions as we have defined them in the framework, and which you saw in Secretary Strickler's presentation earlier this morning. And I'll read some specific additional wording, almost verbatim from it, based on the guidelines that you heard discussed this afternoon. Sorry, I keep thinking it's morning, but it's actually afternoon. Related to what is in the framework and how we would like to move forward as we work to develop this plan with the assistance of offerers, we will be focused on, as has already been discussed, a prioritized, and this is based on these core principles from the framework, and with the advice and assistance of the Technical Advisory Committee, a prioritized list by region of built infrastructure and natural infrastructure that is critical for national security, public health, safety, and the economy. And along with that, at water quality management, flood and storm protection, and wildlife habitat. We also are interested in developing or expanding a project database that will support projects and a prioritization process by region, as well as providing structural solution opportunities and the opportunity to protect and sustain functions are prioritized, built natural infrastructure. And then lastly, a detailed funding needs assessment and list of recommended funding sources to support plan implementation. All of these things will be done in alignment and conjunction with the recommendations of and advice provided by the Technical Advisory Committee. But in order to be able to generate that kind of work and the solutions and the volume of input that will be needed, we know that we need assistance to do that. The other thing I should mention is that this plan will provide guidance for both short and long-term coastal adaptation and protection, but we are specifically interested, and we've discussed this quite a bit already, so we know the interest is there, and it's a key part of this, in integrating a public planning process, integrating community input, stakeholder focus group feedback, including work already done by localities, past and current plans, studies, research. We know we don't have to start from scratch everywhere. Staff input from planning districts, localities, and other stakeholders, and of course, state priorities. So this isn't a start from scratch effort. This is a take what we have and move forward to understand where we have gaps and needs, determine priorities, see what we have for projects, where do we need additional assistance to develop future projects, how will we pay for this, and developing a process by which we can get community input as along the way, and all of the issues that go with that, and the challenges for how we do this and how we build this and make it sustainable over time, this outreach strategy and process, and how we reach out and work with communities who are most challenged, and particularly challenged under the current circumstances, is all a piece of this. We certainly understand that. We are in the process of establishing a review and selection committee, which includes representation from planning districts, from localities, from academia, state agencies, and the Office of the Governor. And the solicitation, as I think many of you are aware, but to confirm, closes on the 31st of December, and we'll be moving forward from there. So optimistically, we'll be able to come to a decision within the next 30 or so days, and be able to get started as soon as possible after that. So subject to your questions, that is the current status and update on the request for proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Phillips. Any questions or discussion on the RFP process? Okay, hearing none, the next item on the agenda is a series of presentations from state agencies with coastal resilience equities to talk to us a little bit about their work. And I apologize in advance. I do not have in my notes the individuals who are going to do these presentations. So I apologize for the impersonal nature of my introductions here, but I've got the Virginia Department of Emergency Management is going to be up first to present. So I'll turn it over to VDEM.
Yep.
Hi, thank you. Oh, there they are. So I will be rather quick. My goal today was just to do a quick briefing on building resilient infrastructure and communities, the BRIC funding that quite a few folks are talking about. And so I just wanted to touch on a few key things. FEMA has done a really great job of putting information on their website as well as links from our website. So that more information, if you'd like more detailed information, it is available, or you can get in contact with me. So just to jump right in, next slide. So this is basically how the BRIC funding is broken down. The Disaster Recovery Reform Act, which amends the section in the Stafford Act, has identified BRIC funding to be pulled 6% set aside from federal post-disaster grant funding. So what that means is it adds up to about $500–600 million. So disasters for that prior year, 6% is set aside. So if you think about that 6% for current FY20 disaster funding, you can imagine that next year's BRIC funding availability may be quite significant. Eligible applicants are states and territories with major declarations in the past 7 years, and it is replacing the pre-disaster mitigation funding program. And not everyone may know about that, but the pre-disaster grant typically helped localities and states fund their hazard mitigation plan updates. Also had a 5% project portion in PDM where a lot of generator projects were funded from. So the other piece of the overall mitigation funding is the flood mitigation assistance grant, about $160 million. And several localities in the Commonwealth over the years have utilized this for different hazard mitigation projects to support elevations, relocations, stormwater, landslide. It's helped quite a few. Just some key things about the BRIC principles, the overall goals, which actually line up quite well with our with the governor's framework. Capability and capacity building, really looking at innovation and partnerships, really reaching out to partners, and that actually garners more points. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Larger infrastructure projects, flood mitigation grant program has always had a cap, as it's a nationally competitive grant program. So with the BRIC funding, it would allow for much larger infrastructure projects. Flexibility as well as consistency, and lines up with FEMA's strategic plan. I will say one of the challenges, though, just as a caveat, still with the BRIC funding, they're still determining the best way. By code, you have to have benefit cost analysis run. That's FEMA's formula that you plug everything into. But one thing they did set up was pre-calculated benefits, so that should help in projects moving forward. Next slide. This just breaks down the priorities and eligible activities. So again, public infrastructure projects, lining up with FEMA's lifelines, so mitigating risk to one or more of the lifelines. Again, lining up with the governor's framework, nature-based solutions. A big push in the BRIC priorities, though, is the adoption and enforcement of latest published editions of building codes and additional points in adopting stricter. So things to think about. Eligible activities, again, lines up with previous hazard mitigation activities, stormwater management, flood control, obviously infrastructure protection, and then storage and diversion. So those are the key activities. Next slide. So I just wanted to just touch on the qualitative and technical criteria. And I apologize, it's a little blurry. If anyone's interested, I can send out a copy of this, but it is available as well on the BRIC site, FEMA. Biggest points in qualitative are obviously the risk reduction and the resiliency effectiveness. And you can kind of see how the points break down from there. Under the technical criteria, the infrastructure projects and the building code, applicant has mandatory building code adoption requirements. Those get more points under the technical criteria. It's really nice that they have put out the criteria so folks can really work through this. But you can kind of look through this and see how the breakdown is for how they're assessing their BRIC application. And again, it's nationally competitive. So next slide. So this breaks down what BRIC 2020 looks like for the Commonwealth of Virginia. We had 42 project applications submitted totaling over $300 million. And that's almost 3 times last year. And then 36 project applications were selected for peer review, again, totaling 300 million. So we did take as many as possible, and you can kind of see the breakdown. VDEM is broken up into 7 regions. Region 5 will be Hampton Roads. Region 7 will be the National Capital Region. Region 1, the Richmond area. And far southwest, near southwest for 2, 3, 4, and 6, and northwest of Virginia. So 36 projects. You can kind of see how they break down. We did end up with some generator projects in there, but flood control projects, living shorelines, some water and sanitary sewer protection. And if you want to flip to go to the next slide, I'll tell you the dates, kind of how it breaks down for where we're going. Next slide. So this is where we are. The peer review process, we're hoping to get accomplished in December 2020. Obviously, COVID has had an effect on the Virginia Department of Emergency Management and being activated since March. So we're hoping to get it in December. If not, it'll be beginning of January because we want to get the applications are due to FEMA by January 29th. And the goal being that we will hear information in July regarding these applications. So I will say, in hearing from my colleagues across the country, for Virginia at 300 million, that's for our state size. That's really kind of what you're seeing across the country. Obviously, larger states have many more millions. So across the country, FEMA did a very big push for this. So it is going to be an extremely competitive program. Access for vulnerable communities has come up a couple of times. We are allocating technical assistance funding to really reach out to our vulnerable communities in the Commonwealth to educate them on the BRIC program going forward, and offering support and help, because a lot of times these emergency managers, public works directors, building officials, whoever has the responsibility in these localities, have multiple hats and don't have the time to sit down and put the time into these applications because they are a bit unwieldy. So that is one of the goals of VDEM going forward, is to really reach out to these communities to provide that assistance going forward. Next slide. With that, any questions on BRIC for me?
Aaron, thank you for that presentation, and apologies again for not identifying you at the top of that. We're going to actually hold questions on all these presentations until the end of the agency section so that we can just move through these relatively quickly. So thanks again. Up next, we've got Tracy Munyon from Department of Housing and Community Development to give an update on their grant funding programs.
Thank you. I'm ready.
Turn it over to you, Tracy.
I'm ready for the first slide. I'm Tracy Munyon, the Resiliency Program Manager, and I'm going to give you all a brief update on two of our agency's programs that we have going on right now. Next slide, please. The first program that I'd like to give an update on is the City of Norfolk's Ohio Creek Watershed Project, and this project was a result of a competitive grant application and was awarded in 2016 to look for ways to bring communities into a more green technology and find ways to seek resiliency. This was a $120 million grant, and the City of Norfolk is the state subrecipient and receives about 112 million of that 120 million. The major components of this grant are road realignment and raising, stormwater improvements, living shoreline, and a community resiliency park. And the project construction started in earnest early last year in 2020, and construction on most of these elements is 30% complete. The other piece of this grant is the creation of a nonprofit called RISE, and they promote resilience innovations. And the cornerstone of this piece of the grant has revolved around challenge awards. And so far, there have been 3 challenge awards, and these stemmed from community input from educators and local governments to determine what the major problems were in relation to resiliency in the Hampton Roads area. So RISE presents a particular problem or problems, and awardees come in, or applicants come in and are judged by a panel of judges. So the first round, there were 6 awards. The second round, also 6 awards. There's a current challenge going on with urban mobility resiliency that looks specifically at technologies that will alert people to rising stormwater. And there were 5 applicants involved in that challenge, and the judges are coming up with their decisions as we speak. There's one additional challenge that's going to occur in 2021, and that will be a general challenge as the first 2 were. Next slide, please. This, I just wanted to take you back again to the Ohio Creek Watershed Project. It consists of 2 communities in the city of Norfolk, the Grandy Village, which is a rental assistance community run by the Norfolk Redevelopment and Housing Authority, and the Chesterfield Heights community, which is a low-income, racially diverse, single-family neighborhood. The picture on the left is the before picture before we got started on the project, and the one on the right shows the extent of the living shorelines, which is a very significant piece of this program. So you can really see the difference that this grant has made in providing sea level rise and local flooding changes for this community. Next slide, please. Again, I just wanted to highlight through photographs. The photograph on the left is the Haynes Creek pump station. There are, I think, a total of 3 pump stations building as part of this project. And the photograph on the right is the Grandy Village Resiliency Park. This is located near an elementary school. It's going to be a stormwater reservoir during heavy rain events like today, and athletic fields and recreational facilities when the weather is not bad. So both of those are about 30% complete. Next slide, please. And 2 final photographs on this project. The one on the left is the Haynes Creek Culvert. The one on the right is the Ohio Creek Arch Bridge. And I just wanted to point out, I really like both of these photographs because they show that behind this project, the eastern branch of the Elizabeth River is an urban working waterway, and there's a lot of industrial traffic, and you can see there's a cement factory surrounding this neighborhood. So not only are the lives of the people in these communities going to be improved, but the environment will also be improved by adding in the berms and the living shorelines and additional wetlands. So pretty telling there. Next slide, please. Okay, the other program I would like to give an update on is our Home Innovations in Energy Efficiency, or HIEE program. They, as a matter of fact, are having their first stakeholder advisory group meeting and public meeting tomorrow, December 15th from 2 to 4. They will be taking public comment. You will need to sign up for that, and there's more information on our webpage on that. So I just wanted to highlight that. They're in a very active mode as this committee is as well. Next page, please. This, the Home Innovations and Energy Efficiency Program was created out of expected budget. It's definitely on a fast track. It was created through action in the General Assembly this year and fine-tuned, starting to be fine-tuned over the summer to now, but it's in its very early stages. 50% of the RGGI proceeds will be directed to this agency, Housing and Community Development for Affordable Housing Programs. Funding consideration for completing upgrades that would not have been feasible otherwise, which would allow programs and projects to be more sustainable over the life of the project and will lower utility costs for low-income residents. Next slide, please. So objectives for this new program at our agency is deep energy retrofits, excluding energy code requirements that complement existing affordable housing construction and rehabilitation incentives to ensure the lowest income population benefits from long-term savings. Also to incorporate innovative approaches that will overcome traditional barriers to building and retrofitting affordable housing at scale. And finally, prioritizing long-term sustainability, durability, and occupant health, such as moisture issues and ventilation and energy upgrades. As I said before, this is in the very, very early stages, and examples of how the funds will be used will be developed starting with our first stakeholder meeting tomorrow. And our agency has just hired an associate director to lead this program. His name is Dan Farrell, and he comes to us from the Virginia Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. He just started last Thursday. So he will hit the ground running as well. Next slide, please. And just the timeline, November, the agencies that were going to be involved with this program were identified: DEQ, DHCD, and Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. Our first advisory group and stakeholder meeting is tomorrow, and we are planning on monthly meetings through March. And then during the first quarter of 2021, I believe it starts in March, the auction for energy credits will open, and our draft guidelines will be available for review. And that does it for me.
Oh, sorry, I was muted again. Thank you, Tracy, for that presentation. Next, we've got Clyde Chrisman, Director of the Department of Conservation and Recreation. Clyde.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. As Secretary Strickler said, I'm Clyde Chrisman, the Director of the Department of Conservation and Recreation. I apologize, I missed the introductions earlier. I was having some connectivity problems, but for those of you that aren't as familiar with the Department of Conservation and Recreation, in addition to the state parks, the natural heritage program, our land conservation, our soil and water conservation programs, we also operate the dam safety and floodplain management programs. I'm going to talk today about two specific items that we're working on. Secretary Strickler mentioned before about the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, and then also I'm going to talk briefly about Executive Order 45. Next slide, please. So Governor Northam issued Executive Order 45, and this was one of the first in the nation efforts establishing the Virginia Flood Risk Management Standard to improve flood protection in coastal areas by discouraging building in floodplains and incorporating sea level rise projections as part of that effort too. And one of the things that's really unique about this is establishing a freeboard standard that basically increases the protection of buildings both in coastal and riverine floodplains by requiring that they be built to certain elevation standards that will protect them from flooding, and also established an interagency work group to develop the National Flood Insurance Program compliance standards for development by state agencies. And if you in your mind, you'll put a period after the word state agencies. Currently, state agencies are covered by local ordinances. With this executive order, this interagency work group is going to be developing these standards that will apply to all state agencies, regardless of what locality they're located in. And that work group met recently as this past Friday, and they're currently working on a second draft of the standards. Next slide, please. So moving on to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, which was established by House Bill 981, Senate Bill 1027. In the Code of Virginia is identified at 45% of the revenue from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative auctions shall be credited to the Community Flood Preparedness Fund for the purpose of assisting localities and residents affected by recurrent flooding, sea level rise, and flooding from severe weather events. Next slide, please. So there are going to be guidelines that will establish the uses of the fund. The language and enactment clause specifically tasks the department in consultation with the Secretary of Natural Resources and the Special Assistant to the Governor for Coastal Adaptation and Protection to establish, guidelines regarding the distribution and prioritization of loans and grants that support flood prevention, protection studies of statewide or regional significance is specifically highlighted in that legislation. Next slide, please. So the code specifically spells out some uses of the fund. First, allows localities to create a low interest loan program to help residents and businesses implementing flood prevention and protection projects and studies in areas that are subject to recurrent flooding. Also grants and loans to mitigate future flood damage and to assist inland and coastal communities across the Commonwealth that are subject to recurrent or repetitive funding. As was mentioned earlier in some of our discussion about making sure that there's equitable access to these funds, the legislation specifically requires that no less than 25% of the monies be dispersed from the fund each year for projects in low-income geographical areas. And also, legislation specifies that priority shall be given to projects that implement community-scale hazard mitigation activities that use nature-based solutions to reduce flood risk. Next slide, please. So the draft guidelines are now available for public comment. I know there was a question earlier about the timing, to which the Secretary answered simply yes, but those draft guidelines are available for public comment now. They were published, I believe, December 7th, and we are accepting public comment until January 31 of 21. And then the goal is for us to have those final guidelines to be released prior to the first Reggie auction that Virginia will participate in March. And so I think that the timing for us to be able to review in the February timeframe to review the comments that we've received during this period of time and be able to discuss and review the comments and maybe make some tweaks to the guidelines. I noticed that there was a Reggie auction recently that Virginia did not participate in yet because our first one will be in March, and the amount of money that came in was, I think, double what the amount of the credits were sold was double what the original projections were in our initial projections. So that's exciting time because it does look that the fund will have some fairly significant resources to work with as we address these very, very real risks to our communities across the Commonwealth. Next slide. Contact information. I know Russ Baxter, our Deputy Director, is on this call, and if there are questions following all the presentations, I'll ask that Russ could be unmuted to help answer those questions, but also Wendy Howard Cooper, who is the Division Director for our Division of Dam Safety and Floodplain Management, and both of their email addresses are there for you should you want more information about everything we're working on. So, Mr. Secretary, in sake of time, that is my presentation.
Great, thank you, Director Chrisman, and appreciate you having your team on the line. Again, we'll hold all questions at the end of this segment. And next, I've got Director David Paler from the Department of Environmental Quality.
Thank you, Secretary Strickler. Just mention a few things that we have going on in this space. One of them is we received some federal funding to develop a pilot method to identify groundwater wells that are expected to be inundation zones for saltwater intrusion. That's actually a project that is going to be managed by VIMS over a year work plan. I think they're in the process of hiring a graduate student now, as with a number of things. In 2020, there's a little bit of a pandemic delay, but that's getting started now. Saltwater intrusion into groundwater is going to become more and more of an issue that we need to pay attention to. We need to be able to predict going forward, and it has the potential to have an increasing level of impact on the lives of folks in coastal Virginia. So this is going to be another step to get a handle on that. And then the Chesapeake Bay Local Assistance Act in House Bill 504 that was passed this last year. It authorized us to change the regulations in that associated with that act to begin to address some issues related to climate change. A draft of that regulation was passed by the Water Control Board last week. It's going to have a 90-day public notice with some significant stakeholder input during that period to figure out what are the, what's the best suite of ways that we can go about having that whole aspect of the Chesapeake Bay Local Assistance Act and resource protection areas and that sort of thing to be responding to resiliency and climate adaptation. So basically, it's going to right now the draft outlines a suite of things that can be done related to RPAs. It basically says that within 3 years of the development of these regulations, which we hope will be getting finished by the end of 2021, that they will develop local ordinances to build these aspects into their ordinances. It will, we look towards at least 30 years of protection for resiliency. There is intended to be a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration intermediate high projection of what the projected flooding impacts are going to be as a basis for some of the actions that are in there. It's one to do to limit the sole use of fill as a resiliency thing. Fill has sort of been a controversial issue that keeps arising, and this one would as the regulation is drafted right now, it would want to look beyond the use of fill in terms of resiliency. Focus on resilience associated with vegetation. Really put an emphasis on living shorelines, and the installation of living shorelines as it's proposed right now would be able to result in a reduced review of your RPA for construction, and then certain water quality improvement aspects that are proposed in the RPA could perhaps provide some relief from the kinds of review that are required under the water quality impact assessment. So those are two things that we have going on in the resiliency world. You've already heard reference in the mitigation world to the fact that that Virginia is now joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative high level. That means that we have set a cap for 2021 of 28 million tons of carbon dioxide emitted from electric generating units, going down 3% a year. So over 10 years, we would get a 30% reduction in CO2 emissions from the generation of electricity at our major electric generating units, Dominion, Appalachian Power, and some others. And so it would, and we will be members of RGGI beginning January 1. The next auction that will happen of CO2 allocation credits would happen in March. Those revenues would then come into the Commonwealth. You heard DHCD talk about 50% of those revenues go into energy efficiency. Another 45% of those revenues are going to go to Clyde's agency for resiliency work. It's potentially a lot of money. We have taken a very conservative budget that would say, it might be $50 million a year that would be generated and divided up. But the latest market prices are looking at very potentially twice that. So DHCD and DMME working together on energy efficiency, and DCR working on resiliency. Could be looking at 50 million a year or more to put into their respective areas. So that's just a huge step forward. And then one other thing that we're involved in that's related to resiliency is land subsidence. 25% of the observed sea level rise is projected to come from land subsidence, which is the result of the over groundwater. You may have heard over the last 4 or 5 years, we have cut back the major withdrawers, put them on a path to cut their withdrawals back by over 50%. We're really focused on making sure that we get to a sustainable use of the coastal aquifer. So, and at least in the Franklin area, international paper has already significantly cut back, and have begun to see some rebound in land elevation. So that's another area that that DEQ is involved in. So that's those are the main things that I had, Mr. Secretary.
Great, thank you, Director Baylor. Appreciate that overview. And the final presentation we have in this segment is from the Virginia Coastal Zone Management Program and the Director of CZM, Laura McKay. Laura.
Thank you, Secretary Strickler. I'll try to make this quick. I know we're running a few minutes behind, but next slide. Just wanted to refresh people, if you aren't familiar with the Coastal Zone Management Program. It's actually a network of state agencies and coastal localities that implement all of the state's coastal laws and policies. And our aim is to restore or strengthen both our coastal ecosystem and economy. And we're authorized under the Coastal Zone Management Act of '72, and most recently under a 2018 gubernatorial continuation letter, which keeps us going in perpetuity. We are funded by NOAA. We get about $2.5 million a year, which is matched by our grantees to implement the program. Next slide. This is what we call our wagon wheel, just to show you roughly what the policies of the program are. So starting about 1 o'clock, and the agencies that implement these laws. So we deal with dunes, marine fisheries, underwater lands, shoreline sanitation, air pollution, point source water, non-point source water pollution, the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, and then also inland fisheries. And recently we've just added some new policies on wildlife and endangered species, on Commonwealth lands, and on plant pests and noxious weeds. Next slide. So under Executive Director 13, the Coastal Zone Management Program is asked to report to the Chief Resilience Officer and Special Assistant on coastal adaptation, and to help work on development of the master plan. And so with all the work that we've done in the past on coastal resilience, it's a pretty good fit. It's pretty natural to what we've already been doing, so we are happy to help out. NOAA supports the elevation of the program and our efforts to create this master plan, so we are in good shape with them. Next slide. So there are basically two different kinds of projects that we've been funding. One set is really focused on natural resilience, taking care of dunes, wetlands, beaches, even shorelines, that sort of thing. And then the other set is more on community resilience, the built environment, and helping coastal communities increase their capacity to deal with climate adaptation. So as an example, next slide, we have projects under natural resilience that include guidance documents, research, data collection, training and outreach. An example is grants to VIMS over the years to document the shoreline, and including things like shoreline evolution from 1937 to 2017. And next slide. On community resilience, this includes regional technical assistance, work on the resilience adaptation feasibility tool and evaluating vulnerability of communities, community rating system participation, and resilience project database, which I'll talk a little bit more in a second. But a good example of this is a recent grant to Hampton Roads PDC, where they looked at the validity of using first floor elevations as a way to assess vulnerability to coastal flooding. I mentioned the Resilience Project database, and we're hopeful that that will be useful moving forward with some of the work that's in the master plan on projects database. This database has a great deal of information in it. It's going to be attached or is attached to the VIMS Adapt Virginia website. And it has data on project proposals, plans and studies, and funding sources. It also maps the project locations. So far, the database has 220 projects, 112 plans, and 54 funding sources. So we're really hoping that's going to help the contractor that wins this RFP to get a good start on developing that list of projects. Next slide. We also have, we're lucky to get through a national competition from NOAA an award to Virginia CZM that we are giving to our DEQ Water Division to develop guidance to address flooding and sea level rise through the Bay Act. This will be a follow-up to what Director Paler just mentioned on that new legislation that, that requires these regulations be updated. So once we have the regulation in place, this grant will help to develop a guidance document for the regs, and some of that work is subcontracted to William & Mary Coastal Policy Center and to BIMS. And next slide, please. We also have in place now for the next 3 years, they're small grants, but we hope they'll be helpful, $30,000 to each of the 8 planning districts in the coastal zone for 3 years. And the PDC, through those grants, can coordinate with their stakeholders and develop and implement the Resilience Master Plan, and develop project proposals for the Coastal Resilience Projects database that I just mentioned. So that those projects will run through September 2023, as long as Congress continues to appropriate funding under the Coastal Zone Management Act. And then finally, my last slide is just to let folks know that we have, beginning in October of 2021, a 5-year coastal hazards strategy, and that will provide funding for next generation shoreline management plans, for an evaluation of the relevant resilience aspects of all of our core enforceable policies, and it will also provide for expanded resilience adaptation feasibility tool work and community rating system initiatives with the localities. So that will amount to about $835,000 over the 5 years, and that will run through September of 2026. And I believe that's all I have for now. And I think we're ready for the Q&A portion.
Great, thank you, Laura. Appreciate that presentation. Obviously, as you all can see, our state agencies have a number of ongoing programs and funding sources that we can use and coordinate to enhance coastal resilience in Virginia. And so hopefully all of us working together with those agencies can get all of that stuff pulling in the same direction. Are there any questions or comments for any of the presenters from the state agencies today?
Secretary Strickler, this is Elizabeth Andrews.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Good afternoon. This is actually, I guess, a question more in light of the presentations. As the TAC proceeds with its work, are we going to be looking at perhaps tweaking or adjusting our goals and actions in light of what we find as these agencies are doing this work to implement? There are a couple of suggestions I would make about ways that we could maybe expand some of the actions listed in Chapter 1 and then Chapter 6, I believe, of the plan framework. Things like, for example, one of the goals is, of course, to implement Executive Order 45, which is great for the state managed buildings, but it'd be wonderful if we could look, for example, at adding a requirement whenever state capital funds are used, capital project funds are used, that a risk vulnerability assessment would be done before we would extend dollars for economic development projects, et cetera. So I didn't know if there'd be an ability to talk about things like that.
Elizabeth, thank you for that. And I think any of those kinds of ideas are things that we should be talking about as a technical advisory committee and that are important to discuss. As you know, that would take, depending on how it's structured, an act of the General Assembly or actions by multiple potentially state agencies, regulatory or otherwise. So I think the TAC, if the TAC wanted to include that as a recommendation and something that would go into the master plan that we put together at the end of the year, then certainly all of those kinds of ideas are on the table and things that I think are important to have, robust discussions about.
Great, thank you. I just mainly, I guess it's a procedural question about when's the best time to raise those as we go through the process. To just, as we go along in the next few meetings, raise them along the way, or what is your preference?
I think raising them along the way is probably the appropriate thing to do. I think there, as we develop a subcommittee structure, there and responsibilities for the subcommittees, I think perhaps there'll be an opportunity to be able to compile some of those recommendations and vet them through the TAC as we move forward. But no, I mean, I think bringing the stuff along the way is perfectly appropriate.
Thank you.
We have a question in the chat asking who will oversee the contractor selected through the RFP.
So a great question. Technically, the RFP is going out. Our Department of General Services is putting it out, but the funds for the RFP and the oversight of the RFP are going to come from the Department of Conservation and Recreation. So Director Chrisman and his floodplain management team are the ones who are on the button for that responsibility. In reality, my office, Admiral Phillips, will be giving them a lot of assistance with that. And certainly we want the contractor to be responsive to the TAC as well. Which is why I had suggested that a presentation from whoever that may be would be appropriate at the next TAC.
Secretary Strickler, this is Mary Carson Stiff. I have a question about the review of the Tidal Wetlands Act. So the CBPA presentation, the inclusion of climate change in the actions that are permissible in the RPA. In the framework, it indicates that the Tidal Wetlands Act and the inclusion of climate change in that act should be working in tandem with the CBPA update. And so I just wonder if there'll be any discussion of how those two new pieces of legislation that include climate change and sea level rise will be reconciled.
Sure. Thanks, Mary Carson. The answer is yes. I mean, we want to, and I think have been doing our best to coordinate those two processes. Obviously, they're on separate tracks because the two agencies have different regulatory requirements. And DEQ has their proposed language out for public comment now. And as I mentioned to Skip when we spoke last week, we're certainly open to suggestion on how we move forward with that. So yes, any suggestions folks have or any time that people on the TAC want to bring up, concerns or questions or ideas for how that process is or isn't working, and how those two agency initiatives are or aren't being coordinated, yes, this is an appropriate forum for that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have a couple more questions in the chat regarding the CFPF. He is asking how low income will be determined, how the loan element works, and if you could elaborate on the local resilience plan.
Sure. So we'll take those in sequence. The low-income community definition is in the statute and the Community Flood Preparedness, Clean Energy and Community Flood Preparedness Act that was passed last year, and I don't have, I apologize, the language right at my fingertips, and I wouldn't want to butcher it by guessing at the verbiage, but there is a a defined in statute method for identifying what those communities are. So there is a method for doing that. The apologies. Remind me of what the other two questions were.
Could you elaborate on the loan element for the CFPF?
Gotcha. I can elaborate on it insofar as, we will have a capitalized fund once we get RGGI proceeds in, and we can use the capital that's in that fund to back low or potentially no interest loans for localities. And this is something that we should talk about in this forum. Initially, there are a couple of ways you can do this, right? You can make loans available to for projects that are not ranked as quite as high of a priority. Through our process, working with the TAC and working with our offices through the establishment of guidelines. You can use the loan program for bigger ticket items, ones that we just don't have the ability to fully fund using cash out of that fund. But the mechanics of it are familiar, right? I mean, we use a similar mechanism for the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund and other, kind of state guaranteed loans. So I think it'll work fairly seamlessly. Stephanie Hamlet from VRA is on here too. Stephanie, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that at all.
Hi, this is Peter Delaney with VRA, and I've worked with Stephanie Hamlet. I'd be glad to make a few comments if that would be helpful.
Sure, Peter, that'd be great. If you could turn up your volume a little bit, that would be helpful, at least for me.
Sure. Hopefully that's better. I apologize if it's low. So the guidelines that have been released so far for DCR speak primarily to grants, but there is reference to the possibility for loans. And so VRA primarily would administer these loans on behalf of DCR, but it would be based on DCR's guidelines in terms of what they set for prioritization and ranking of these projects as they come in. So really the way those draft guidelines read now for grants effectively could be the same thing for loans. It kind of just depends on how DCR would like to approach those funds and what the criteria would be for loans versus grants. So it really would work very similar to grants, except obviously the loans would be repaid either with or without interest rate. And those funds would be able to be recycled for future projects over time.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Appreciate that.
The last piece of that question was if you could elaborate on the requirement, the local resilience plan requirement.
Sure. So this is something that, as far as being able to, help identify what projects are important to localities is, I think, going to be critical, to making sure that we're using our funds effectively. And a lot of communities already have something that either will check this box or will get a long way towards checking this box, right? I mean, we don't intend this to be a particularly heavy lift for localities. And we also, I think importantly, would like to be able to use the fund to help localities that haven't done this yet and maybe lack the capacity to just come up with the funding to do it, to help them put together that work. But the idea is we want a lot of the solutions here to be driven from the bottom up, and the first step in that is having local planning and local ideas for what's really important on the resilience front.
We have another question for DHCD. Do you anticipate reprogramming of funds for existing programs given the influx of RGGI funds?
I am going to have to refer to Kristen Dahlman. If you could unmute her, please. She is more involved in the program design aspect of this project, and she may not have an answer yet on this. Kristen, are you available?
Kristen, you should be able to unmute now.
She may not be on. I know she was on a few minutes ago. We will have to get back with you on that, but I suspect it would be. Most of our projects involve loans that are.
Oh. Hang on, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Sorry, I had my headset on, but I turned the microphone off. I apologize.
No problem.
Katie, can you just repeat the question? Was it just folks were asking whether with the influx of RGGI funding, if we're going to expand on existing programs? Was that the question?
The question is, does DHCD anticipate reprogramming funds given the influx of RGGI funds?
Well, as Tracy kind of mentioned, we're having our first stakeholder meeting tomorrow, and so the department has not made any decisions yet on how the funds are going to be spent. So we're looking to garner feedback. If that means restructuring a program to make it more to have the funds go farther and restructuring that a little bit, we're open to that. We're just trying to figure out how to best stretch our funding, and of course to include those energy efficiency upgrades as well.
Thanks, Kristen. The last question in the chat for now is part of the state's coastal resilience efforts looking at regional sediment management and beneficial use for thin layer replacement projects. Sorry, Jessica, if you want to jump in and clarify that for us.
Sorry, Katie, whose question was that?
That was from Jessica Granis.
Jessica, are you still on?
Yeah, sorry, was struggling to find my unmute. Yeah, I was just wondering if you were participating in any of the Corps' efforts to look at beneficial use of dredge material and developing a regional sediment management planning process.
Thanks, Jessica. The short answer is yes. We're heavily involved with the Corps on any number of beneficial use and dredge spoil related issues. Commissioner Bowman, would you care to elaborate on that at all?
Secretary Strickler, this is Tony Watkinson, Chief of Habitat Management Division.
Hey, Tony.
I know the Commissioner might have had another appointment this afternoon. He might have had to leave early. I do want to mention one effort that's underway. We're working with what's called the Virginia Beneficial Enhancement Working Group. It's really directed at looking at opportunities for dredge material from the Baltimore channels that go through Virginia for the Maryland Port Administration. But we've just started a working group with the Corps districts to look at options for use of that material, with the notion that we could develop a suite of projects that might capitalize on dredge material from any project throughout the Commonwealth. So I think that's just one initiative we currently have underway.
Thanks, Tony. Jessica, is there something more specific you were looking for, or does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that answers my question. I just was wondering if some of that would be part of these discussions.
We're happy for it to be. It's definitely an important component of everything we're trying to do with coastal resilience. So we can tee that up for a future meeting if there's a desire to do that.
Whitney Catchmark has her hand up. So Whitney, if you'd like to go ahead, you can unmute.
Sure. This is a question, I think, for Laura. I was curious in terms of the coastal zone programs involvement, if you thought about maybe using existing structure like the policy team to review the draft deliverables for the consultant, especially since it looks like it's going to move pretty fast.
Hey, Whitney. Well, I think Ann Phillips may want to chime in. She is setting up a review committee, but Ann, if you would like to use the coastal policy team for anything, you know where we are. We do have a coastal policy team meeting coming up January 28th, which may be a little bit late for that review process, but yes, we do have those coastal policy team meetings that represent so many of the natural resource and other agencies. There's actually about 12 or 14 different agencies I didn't mention. I was rushing through my slides. I will leave that to Ann to let her decide if she would like to use the policy team for any kind of review of the consulting bids. I also wanted to mention, I went so quickly, I wanted to say that the Resilience Projects database grant was to Wetlands Watch, and in talking with them this morning, I know they would be happy to present that database, give a quick overview of it at the next TAC meeting, if that would be of interest to folks. It's pretty powerful. But Ann, do you want to weigh in any on the review process for the RFP?
Thank you, Laura. First of all, thank you for that, and thank you for the reminder about the Watch's existing database. So we certainly are aware of that, and it has evolved over time, and so want to know more about it. As I mentioned earlier, in the context of the review process, we are putting together a team that will do that work, and it does include representation from planning districts, localities, academia, state agencies, and the Office of the Governor. And some of those people happen to be part of VCCM's policy team, but not all. That's where we are in that process.
And sorry, this is Whitney. I just want to say, I was actually thinking once the contract was awarded, as you move through, developing deliverables.
Okay, for as those deliverables come in, I guess over the summer, again, I'll defer to Anne on that.
If I could just jump in here, Whitney, thank you for the question. I think the first place that we'd like to have any of that kind of vetting go on is within this body, and if there are certain components that we think are appropriate to be farmed out to the coastal policy team to take a look at, we can certainly talk about that.
All right, we have one question. Sorry, Ann. We have one question left. Mary Carson Stiff, looks like you had your hand up.
Oh no, sorry, that was leftover. I just took it down, didn't realize it. My apologies.
All right, that's the end of our questions then.
Okay, well, what I'd like to do now is we are a few minutes over kind of what we had planned for our time to be, but I don't want to cut off any good discussion that we could potentially have, but we also need to give an opportunity for any members of the public to comment. So at this point, I'd like to move into that public comment phase for a moment. Katie, do we have any requests for public comment?
We have one person signed up for public comment, and I see that they are on the phone, so I can go ahead and unmute them.
Great, please do, and please identify yourself and say hi to the group for us. Thanks.
Okay, Uday Kambata, you are unmuted if you'd like to give your public comment now. Are you there?
You may need to actually actively unmute yourself now that you've been authorized to unmute. Okay. Is there anyone else, Katie, in public comment?
There is no one else signed up. Okay.
Great. We'll at least press pause on that for now. Is there any more discussion from the members of the group? If not, I'd like to just talk a little bit about some proposed next steps before we break. Okay, not hearing anything else. Again, really appreciate everybody's time today. I think this was a good first meeting, and obviously, appreciate your patience. It's a little bit, slower. I think the next meeting and subsequent meetings will be more active, more engaging. But this was good to get the introductions done, get to know everybody, get some good baseline information from our state agencies, and kind of a shared understanding of the framework document and roles and responsibilities. So what I'd like to do, as I mentioned, is try to get a time that works for most people, around mid-February to reconvene. In the meantime, I would like to propose that my team and I will put together kind of a draft subcommittee slate, and then based on that, take people's gauge people's interest in serving on one or more subcommittees and try to fill out those rosters relatively quickly, so that we can potentially even have some engagement in advance of the next meeting on some of these important topics that we brought up today. We've already mentioned a couple of things that we think we might want to have on the agenda for the next meeting. any other items that kind of rise to the top for folks that we think we ought to really get into when we reconvene in a couple of months?
Hey, Secretary Strickler, it's again Colonel Pat Kinsman, Norfolk District. The only thing that's coming to mind is, again, I've got the kind of the RFP timeline and focus, up that I'm looking at, and I think really there's some, continued planning effort to ensure that if we look over the next year with the contractor submissions, really where, the TAC is going to have a heavier role. So I think further refining where you want and Admiral Phillips wants the TAC to really engage based on maybe some of the deliverables that the contractor is going to provide. And then I think as you're alluding to, kind of the other related work that you want the TAC to do as well. So again, that's just kind of my read as I'm going through what the contractor is being asked to provide over. I think you're muted.
I am muted indeed. Thank you for that. It's a good point, and our objective would be to try to sync up, the work of the TAC, with the kind of major categories of work that we're trying to get the contractor to do. So it's a point well taken, and we'll keep that in mind as we're moving ahead. All right. Well, hearing nothing else, we're right at 3:15. I kept you all a little bit over today, and I apologize for that. But again, appreciate everybody's time and input here, and look forward to getting together again soon after the holidays. Thanks a lot, and we will adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Ooh, let's see what this says.